Good morning. We come to the seventh Sunday of Easter. We've just celebrated the Feast of the Ascension, and next Sunday we will come to Pentecost. We're in a kind of in-between moment. And our reading is from Ezekiel chapter 26, verses 24 to 28. Now last week I spoke about covenant, which is about healthy relationship and how God remakes relationship, and the rainbow of that is a symbol of that new covenant. And the whole of the Bible might be summarized as being about relationship between God and his people, God and us, and of course that has implications for the relationships we have one with another. It's really a very simple story. It's about a relationship that begins wonderfully, it goes wrong, and it is made anew. And that just doesn't happen once, it happens time and time again. God never ever gives up on us. And Ezekiel writes, "You shall be my people and I shall be your God." That's about mending relationship. Ezekiel lived about 600 years before Jesus. It was a time when Israel had been invaded, the temple destroyed, many of the people carried off into captivity. People saw that as a sign that they'd been abandoned by God. They felt bereft. Now Ezekiel's an interesting character. He sometimes acts out the message that he heard. So in chapter 5, for example, you find that he takes a sword and he uses it to cut his own hair. Ezekiel invented the lockdown haircut. And if you're one of those folk who've tried cutting your own hair during this difficult period, then you need to read chapter 5 and discover what happens next. Sometimes, indeed very often, Ezekiel's words are uncomfortable and we might shy away from him. But Ezekiel is a prophet in the truest sense. He says hard things because he is grasping nettles. He is grasping difficult truths. And it's only when we grasp those difficult truths that healing and restoration are possible. So ultimately, everything Ezekiel says is about hope and love. God never giving up on his people. And one of the best known bits of Ezekiel is chapter 37, when the Spirit of God takes him to a valley full of bones. And as he says, very dry bones in which life was totally annihilated. And God asks him, "Man, can these bones live?" Now, it helps us to remember that in those times, people believed that once somebody had died, they were cut off from God completely. Their existence was over. God could do nothing for the dead. The dead were beyond his reach. The relationship was broken permanently. And so, in Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, something radically new is introduced into the biblical story. For the first time we hear that God can actually reach out even to those beyond death. His vision of the Valley of Bones is something completely new. You might know the song, "Them bones, them dry bones," first recorded by the Jubilee Singers in 1928. And the second verse says, them bones, gonna rise again. Them bones, gonna rise again. Them bones, gonna rise again. Now hear the word of the Lord. Where life was destroyed, where people felt utterly cut off from God, where all hope was lost, God chooses to act. That is something completely new. Now these are difficult times. As I said, this Sunday we find ourselves between the Ascension and the gift of the Spirit at Pentecost. There's a sense of being in an in-between moment. And it's in that strange in-between times. People have said to me this week quite often, "I am feeling bereft." Now it's interesting because that's not a word we use very often these days, but several times over the past week in conversations, over the telephone, or perhaps over a garden fence or wall, people have used that word, "I am feeling bereft." That is to do with things we have lost, of living in a gap. A friend said to me, "These are strange times. all the landmarks have been taken away, and that captures that sense of feeling bereft and lost and not knowing where we're going. Much has been taken from us, and there's little we can sense that is coming to take its place. And the most important bit of that is the sense that we are out of relationship. We can't go to visit friends. Grandparents can't give their grandchildren a hug. Our churches remain closed, and we're forced to keep others at a distance. I think it helps us to be reminded that when Jesus' friends encountered his Easter body, that body still bore the scars of crucifixion. Jesus said to Thomas, "Put your finger in the mark of the nails in my hands and in my feet, and put your hand into the slash in his side of the wound of the spear." Resurrection, new life, new relationship does not pretend that bad things didn't happen. The body Jesus takes to his Father's side is not suddenly made perfect. The humanity that ascends is pierced and stabbed and beaten. God's relationship encounters us, takes us, accepts us where we are, and that includes this sense of feeling bereft. And Ezekiel reminds us that God does not act by waving a magic wand. He acts through mending relationships. If we sense ourselves in a place without landmarks, if we are feeling lost and confused, if we are sensing being bereft, then maybe it is how we make and renew and sustain relationships that is our guide. And that might be our relationship with others. For example, somebody we haven't made contact with recently. It might be our relationship with somebody we've spent more time with recently, because that isn't always easy. It most certainly has to do with our relationship with God and how we renew and sustain that. But remember this, the first step of that relationship is simply being willing to stop and be still and listen and accept that it is God who first reaches out to us. It's a relationship in which we have to do very little, only be willing to stop and listen. In the depths of silence, no words are needed, no language required. In the depths of silence, we are called to listen. Listen to the beating of your heart. Listen to the blowing of the wind. Listen for the movement of the Spirit. Be silent, says the Lord, and know that I am God. And listen also to the cry of those whose voices are not heard. And listen to those whose sufferings are overlooked. And listen to those who are anxious and fearful. And listen to the weeping of those who mourn. But do not forget to listen also for the laughter of children. For in this is authentic relationship. Listen to people. Live with people. Live for